The Handkerchief by Great 78. Chapter 9. Mirrors, Mandrakes, and Middle of the Night Apologies. After Hermione left to speak with Moaning Myrtle, Draco hurried towards his main staircase, eager to get down to the Quidditch pitch to catch the beginning of the match. He had a nervous, excited buzz in his stomach that he could not quite explain. But the rest of the day had been rather bleak. Draco could tell something was wrong almost immediately as he entered the stands of the Quidditch pitch. It had still been rather cool, so he'd stopped off in the Slytherin dormitory for his scarf. There he found a large group of late-starting Slytherins to walk down with, ready to cheer both teams to defeat. They made their way down to the Quidditch pitch as a group, loudly laughing and taking bets on who would get knocked out by a bludger first. It was only a few minutes until the broom mounting when McGonagall entered the pitch and cleared the players off. No one seemed to know what had happened, but the match had been cancelled. Draco went back to the Slytherin common room, where his housemates gathered to play chess or gobstones and speculate about why the match was cancelled. He skipped lunch, instead having a house elf bring him his favourite speculoos crepes. Talking about them earlier with Hermione had made him crave 1 or 3. Now, as the dinner hour began in the great hall, it was apparent that something else had happened besides the Quidditch match being cancelled. Another attack. Draco's eyes swiftly cut to the Gryffindor table. Hermione was not there. Neither were Potter and the Weasel, so hopefully the three were off just doing stupid Gryffindor things in their stupid Gryffindor way. It was after dinner, back in the common room, that Draco learned the news. Pansy, Slytherin's own personal news source, shared that Hermione and a Ravenclaw girl, a prefect named Penelope Clearwater, had been petrified. She cackled with unrestrained glee as she shared the story, and Draco felt like punching something. Why had he not insisted on accompanying her? He could have stopped it, could have fought off whatever it was. A few nights passed, nights in which Draco tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep and stay asleep. He kept replaying moments of conversation that he'd had with Hermione in the library. What had she meant by people might start to talk? About the two of them, together? Surely not. Had it only been a joke? By Thursday, Draco felt as though he had to see her. Thaddeus Locksley was the prefect on patrol that night, and he often bragged about skiving off of rounds and taking his Hufflepuff sixth-year prefect girlfriend to an empty classroom for some alone time. If he was careful, Draco could make his way to the infirmary room without meeting anyone else in the castle. 20 minutes later, he found himself creeping along the room of the infirmary, drawn by the long sweep of brown curls that fell from the edge of a bed near the back. Crossing on quiet feet, Draco moved towards her, stopping just short at the foot of her bed. Granger. Hermione. What happened? Now that he was here, it was hard to find words to say to her. He had heard Professor Flitwick telling Professor Sprout that the petrified students likely could not hear in their current state, yet he was still moved to speak to her. The way she looked so deathly still like this was frightening, but he could not bring himself to look away. So I suppose we were right. A basilisk, was it? And you had to go ahead and do the bloody Gryffindor thing and save this other bird. Draco gestured to the Ravenclaw prefect on the other bed, trying to force a note of humour into his voice. It was either that or possibly cry, and Merlin knew that he did not want to cry. Were you able to tell anyone before it happened? Likely not, or this wouldn't still be happening. If McGonagall had known that a giant murderous snake was on the loose in Hogwarts, everyone would have been packed and loaded onto the Hogwarts Express within minutes. He wondered briefly if he should tell what they had learned, and to whom. McGonagall was the acting headmistress, but she was likely uninterested in the theories of a second-year Slytherin. Perhaps Madame Pomfrey? No. She likely had enough on her plate to be getting on with, taking care of all these petrified people, as well as the usual student injuries and illnesses. If he'd had his head on straight, he would have gone to Hagrid to discuss it all long ago. After all, the man knew all about creatures. He might have been able to help, but that was impossible now. Draco's own father had seen to that. For most of his second year, Draco had avoided going to visit Hagrid. With all the discussion of purebloods and mudbloods, Draco felt like he had a spotlight on him, and it wouldn't do to be seen visiting Hagrid. If he saw Hagrid in the corridors of the castle, Draco would look down, or quickly pretend to be mid-conversation. Draco heaved a sigh. Another thing to feel guilty about. Draco turned back to Hermione. Reaching out hesitantly, he touched her hand, surprised to find it warm and soft, despite the stiffness of her pose. Curling his fingers around hers, he felt the rough scratch of paper. Excitedly, he tugged a small bit of the piece of paper from her grip, recognizing it at once as the page from Creatures of the Dark that he had written "Pipes" on. He stuffed the page back into her palm, careful this time to leave a small corner of it up, so that it would be noticed by her next visitor. Surely Potter and the Weasel came up every day to check on her. It might take them some time, but perhaps they could piece things together. "Hermione, I'm so sorry. I should have come with you. Please wake up." He took her hand again, this time holding her wrist gently. It felt unusual, as though there was something more than just her school jumper on it. He stood to get a better look, and gently tugged on the triangle of white that was poking out from under the knitted grey. It was his handkerchief. No, hers. No, theirs. It was no longer in the pocket where he'd seen her place it when she left the library. At some point between then and being petrified, she'd taken it out. Perhaps she'd used it to signal to the Clearwater girl, or maybe to wipe off smudges from her shockingly tiny mirror. Regardless, Draco felt slightly better. He may not have been in the corridor with her when it happened, but he had been on her mind in some small way. "Hermione," he tried again, but he had no more words. He tucked the handkerchief back where he found it, then reached up his hand to rest briefly on her chocolate curls, and closed his eyes. Draco was not one to ask favors from a higher power, but if ever there was a night for such things, it was tonight. When the mandrakes were properly brewed and the petrified people were restored, Draco looked on with careful neutrality, along with the rest of the Slytherins. Inwardly he might be dancing a jig, but outside he was just as composed as ever. He surreptitiously watched Hermione as she greeted her fellow Gryffindors, jealous at the small hug she exchanged with Potter. No, not jealous. What a ridiculous idea. He made his eyes move over to Justin to confirm that he, too, was fine. The boys' eyes met briefly, and there was a small nod of greeting and confirmation between them. He looked back at Hermione. She had her hands clasped together in front of her in joy, and she exclaimed to yet another scarlet-clad well-wisher. He saw her thumb and index finger pull slightly at the cuff of her jumper, withdrawing the white square of fabric. She chanced to look at him, and offered the tiniest of smiles. She tucked the handkerchief back in discreetly. Draco could not explain why his heart began racing suddenly, nor did he wish to think about it very hard. The leaving feast had been a joyous evening. Well, middle of the night, really. It was a celebration for the unpetrified students and for Hagrid's and Dumbledore's returns. Draco realized at some point during the feast that he was sitting amongst his fellow Slytherins, some of whom he liked, many of whom he just kind of tolerated. The Slytherins' applause was half-hearted, sometimes some even jeered quietly. But they were celebrating people whose company he actually enjoyed, but had avoided most of the year. Hermione and Hagrid, and even Justin, in a way, had added happiness to his life when they hadn't needed to, when their happiness was actively threatened by him, even. Draco was glad to have made up with Hermione, but he decided that he'd avoided Hagrid long enough. Lucius had told the tale to Draco weeks before of how he'd orchestrated Hagrid's stint in Azkaban by threatening the other governors. It was clear at Hagrid's return that he was happy to be home, but haunted by what he'd seen. As the castle settled for a pre-dawn kip, at around 4 o'clock in the morning after the feast, Draco tried to lie down to rest as well, but the guilt gnawed at him, until he finally got up and slipped out of the castle, and into the night. He hurried down the hill to Hagrid's hut, as the dawn loomed in the far distance. Hagrid answered the door in high spirits, which were quickly dampened when he spotted Draco. "Malfoy." The older man's words were both a statement and a question. I thought I should apologize for my father's actions. I know being in that place, it must have been difficult, and I'm sorry." They looked at each other solemnly for a moment, then Draco turned to go. Hagrid's voice stopped him. "You got nothing to apologize for, Malfoy. Sometimes a parent don't always do right by their kids, or by other people. It's not your fault." Draco said nothing, but turned back to give Hagrid a nod of understanding. After a moment, Draco reached out to shake his hand quickly, then patted Fang on his great wide head, and made as if to leave again. "I nicked a plate of cakes from the Great Hall earlier, if you haven't anywhere to be. Not time yet to be cooking breakfast or anything. You're welcome to join me." Draco smiled timidly and crossed the threshold, sitting and talking more freely than he ever had before with Hagrid, knowing the long summer away would protect their secret acquaintanceship. They shared cakes and elderflower juice. They talked of creatures, Quidditch, even golf. Draco was surprised to learn that Hagrid's father had nearly been a professional at the sport, though Hagrid himself didn't play on account of his height. They discussed their favorite magical beasts. Hagrid told Draco that, though he'd never even gotten into OWL levels officially, the previous gamekeeper Og, as well as old Professor Kettleburn, had shared many insights about the various creatures and how to communicate with them. "It takes a little effort, but you can really begin to understand them after a time, and I like to think they understand me and all as well," Hagrid said to him, beaming with pride. Neither of them particularly cared one way or another about unicorns, despite both their wand cores containing unicorn hair. Both had a strong affinity for dragons, of course. Hagrid also liked thestrals and acromantula, much to Draco's horror, and Hagrid seemed pleasantly surprised to hear all about Starclaw. "You like hippogriffs, huh?" "Yeah, they're so unusual. I think they're amazing." "You ought to take magical creatures next year. Professor Kettleburn and me have been raising all sorts of creatures you might enjoy," Hagrid said with a knowing smile. The train ride home was relaxing. It was a beautiful summer day to unwind, play games, and enjoy a pile of cauldron cakes and chocolate frogs. Draco stood and stretched, then headed out of the door to the toilets down the hall. He met Hermione, and couldn't stop himself from grinning widely at her. "So, Malfoy, it turned out that my pixie mirror was plenty big enough. I didn't need your giant mirror after all," she giggled. "That's good, because I think Lockhart nicked it when he left," Draco joked, and though she tried to look stern, Draco could see the laughter in her copper eyes.
So I take it Scarface and the Weasel solved the mystery about the chamber.
Yes, they came to the same conclusions we did, she said, though Draco could not help but notice that it seemed to have taken them more time than it did him and Hermione.
Good. Although, if those wankers keep sodding off and earning a boatload of points at the end of every year, they're going to find themselves locked in a chamber at some point. First that Philosopher's Stone business, and now this.
Draco joked. Hermione looked shocked. How did you know about the Philosopher's Stone? That bit was never revealed to the students.
I know everything, Granger. Besides, who do you think pointed you to that book with Nicholas Flamel in it?
His silver eyes glittered, pleased as she flushed brightly. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Malfoy. Oh, by the way, since you asked so nicely, how did you put it? Yes, I did do the bloody Gryffindor thing and saved that other bird.
Hermione smirked. Draco's eyes widened. It was his turn to be surprised. So much for petrified people not being able to hear their visitors. What did you do? Give her a lecture right there in the corridor, Granger?
He quirked an eyebrow at her. No, I waved her down with this. Hermione touched her cuff lightly. So, thank you for that, from both of us, I guess. It really is true, you never know when you might need one.
Right, Granger. He smiled at her. Well, have a good summer. See you in September.
Draco's second summer home from Hogwarts was better than his last one. His father remained in an ill temper for the duration of summer, as he had been removed from the Hogwarts Board of Governors for actions unbecoming of a board member. He also appeared to be at a loss about the elf staff, becoming agitated when he called for one of them. Draco had learned his lesson not to discuss Potter or Hermione with his father, instead occasionally bringing them up along with his fellow Slytherins to his mother. When grades arrived, Draco was pleased to learn that having not had final examinations meant that there were no class rankings, so his high marks were able to stand by themselves. But the best part of the summer was the knowledge that somewhere a witch carried a reminder of him around with her, tucked inside of her sleeve. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Handkerchief by Great 78.